Okay. Um, Leticia, I see that the live stream started, right?
Hmm.
Okay,
Go ahead.
cool. So thank you all folks for coming. Hope you are having a good day, a good morning, a good afternoon. Today I'm gonna be presenting about large language models. More specifically, I'm gonna present a paper that we shared earlier that is called Bridging the Gap, a practical step-by-step guide. I think I actually shared the presentation notes instead. Sorry. Uh, can you see the whole presentation now?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's better. So the paper is called Bridging the Gap, a practical step-by-step approach to warrant safe implementation of large language models in healthcare. That you're probably aware how this is a hot topic in medicine just now. It's been a hot topic for the last few years, I want to say now, and we're starting to see more and more things, more and more models to be implemented and put into practice on things like supporting clinicians in taking notes, helping in generating documentation for patient encounters, responding to questions for patients online, and all that kind of stuff. For those that don't know me, my name is João Vitor. I am a assistant professor at the Department of Emergency Medicine, and I'm also at the Division of Translational Health Sciences, and of course, a researcher at Gemini as well. So this paper was published in January 2025 by Jessica Workroom and colleagues in Frontiers in Artificial Intelligence. And if you wanna go learn more about it later, I definitely recommend. It's a short paper and it's an easy read. It's more on like a high level discussion on what are the challenges and what we can do to address them. Before we start, let's just have a super quick introduction on what is a large language model. We hear this all the time. We use ChatGPT all the time. If you are at Duke or if you have a Duke account, you already have access to Duke Copilot, which is a version from the Microsoft large language model that is available through your Duke email. You can now, as of last month or something, we also have access to a Duke version of ChatGPT. So it's safer, it has some additional layers of security, and there's even more resources in the for folks that are using this, and I'm sure that this is the case in other universities, in companies, etc. Everyone wants to have their own version for terms of safety, etc. But if we're going to put it very simply, this is a deep learning architecture trained to predict the next word. We don't need to get much in detail on what deep learning is, but essentially this notion of that these models are trained to predict the next word is very important for us to understand what are the limitations and how this process goes. This is essentially a probabilistic process, and it kind of just works because you have vast amounts of data to train this model, and eventually the model learns what a sentence would look like, what is the expected response the user is expecting, and a quick example is that when you are typing to ChatGPT or to any of these models, what it's doing is that after inserting each word, it is calculating the probability of including a next word. So essentially, you have all of the words in the dictionary. If this is in English, but it could be in Portuguese, it could be in Swahili. It is going to give up a risk or a percentage, a probability of being one, but at the same time, it's actually calculating the probability of being, I don't know, turtle, of being, bottle, or cup, or any other word. And based on the context of the prompt that you asked, some words are going to get more priority than others. And eventually you end up with a phrase that is, I want to eat candy, right? And this notion of probability is very important when we talk about, well, it is common for us to use ChatGPT and see those hallucinations where the model is just making up facts and it's giving you an answer like the model thinks that is super reliable and is actually very believe it says the model puts it in a way that is very close to reality. And what I want to say is that these models, they are not thinking from memory, they are generating based on context and of course based on the training material. And this is a very important notion on thinking about the limitation of this. This is not as it's not as going to Google and searching for a fact. This is the model generating based on context. And most times we're seeing how these models are getting better and better. All right. Um, and you've probably seen a few of these company logos, a few of these solutions. Are probably the OpenAI logo is the most recognizable of these, but we have things like Llama, which is from this is all Llama actually. It's a solution for open source models. This is a Meta from like the Facebook, Mixtro models, Anthropic. All of these are either companies or open source solutions that are trying to develop these models and develop and deliver them. But in context of today's presentation, we want to talk about LLMs in healthcare. So, quick background, we talked about how LLMs have this potential to do pretty much everything. So, if the authors here, they even talk about how LLMs are kind of like a Swiss Army knife, like those that you pull a knife and then you have scissors and then you have like a nail file and then you have a screwdriver because they can do pretty much everything. They are not, they are really generalistic models. They are trained on everything. So they are kind of good in everything. For healthcare specifically, we have a lot of potential. We can have them summarizing records, generating discharge docs, helping with clinical decision support. Um, and that is all good. That is all incredible. But then when we start to talk about actual patients and actually driving decisions, this gets a little tricky. So that's why the focus of this paper is on implementation. And a quick example is how GPT-4 outperformed clinicians when they were reviewing cases, clinical cases from a standard database where GPT-4 got 50%, 57% of them correct versus 30% of them for the clinicians. But essentially, there is a gap on lack of practical, actionable guidance for safe implementation of these models. That's why the authors propose a practical roadmap for providers and organizations to implement LLMs in healthcare. And they also propose a 7-step approach for safe and responsible adoption of them in healthcare. And they do this by introducing the acute framework for evaluation. So I really think that this is a good um, um, paper for that to have as a reference, especially when you're trying to propose something to implement something related to healthcare, because now at least you have a roadmap for implementation, which has always been a problem with any AI, any models at all. Like this is something that has been a nightmare. If you not a nightmare, but something that is been troubling researchers overall if you're working with AI or modeling in healthcare. So what they do is that they divide this implementation process into 7 steps, and which the first step is protect patient privacy. Essentially, because we are dealing with patient data, we're dealing with personalized health information. I always forget the acronym PHI is private health information or something. Sorry. So it's identifiable information, things like age, name, zip code, um, name of your mother, your zip code as I said, address, your social security number, or if you are in Brazil, your CPF. All of these stuff can be stored in medical records because they are relevant. But if we use them or if we give unrestricted access to these data points for the large language model, we might end up with leakage of data. And this is especially important because each country or each region, each hospital, each institution is going to have their own data governance policy. And they are strict or their specific compliance, which they need to adhere to. So just an example, in Europe, we have the General Data Protection Regulation, which has different, or that has similar but different regulation to the regulation in the United States, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Just to give you an example of how this can be problematic when using health data, when using personalized health information to train models, is an example here in the left where you can retrieve pretty much images that are really, really close to the training data by training your model to produce, to mimic the error. So this is a deep learning example. This is not specifically for a large language model. This is not for text, but it shows us how you can pretty much mimic or extract information that is really close to the training data by inputting the noise generated by the model and getting a response in the generated data that is really, really similar to your input. So this is something that has been a problem for deep learning for the last 10 years. But more recently, when we are talking about large language models, this becomes even more of a problem because now you can text, you can type, and you can ask for specific data. So this example here, it's was published in 2021, and it was on GPT-2. We are now on GPT-5, if you've been following the news. But just by starting to type an address, so East Strasbourg, the GPT-2 would basically prompt you with the full address that was used to train the model. So this is like an extraction attack where you use a strategy to try to get the data that was used to train the model. This is especially, as I said, this is especially important. This is especially problematic for large language models because you can talk to the model, essentially. You can type. So if you were looking at the news when the first GPT models came out, the GPT-3 and 4, you could type and ask for a key to activate Windows, and it would give you a real key that a person would actually have to pay Microsoft to use. But because this was available somewhere in the internet, in the training data, the model would give you this key, which is a major issue if you think about patient information like this. Just by starting typing the address, you get the full address. And this is just an example of how you could potentially leak out important and protected information. There are many strategies to try to mitigate this. You can try some guardrails. You can try to put up some like firewall approach. But one of the things that people have been trying to do is to have local or cloud hosting under the hospital control or under the institution control. So instead of me sending my questions or sending my data to OpenAI, I'm sending my data to a safe version of the model that is living within the health IT infrastructure in my hospital, in my institution, which is similar, which is this notion that I told you of this Duke GPT, of this, I don't know, Harvard GPT or something where you're going to have the model running inside your IT infrastructure. Another possible solution is to have encrypted APIs with strict contracts, which is essentially, well, you're going to have a key uh, which is encrypted to contact the company, to send your data to the company, but then the contract really specifies what data can be kept, what data needs to be destroyed, so you avoid these issues with patient privacy. And unfortunately, this comes with a trade-off. Um, these proprietary models like GPT, like Claude, that is from Anthropic, they are huge and they are the best around. Um, these companies, they're not just gonna give you this model for you to use and repurpose and do whatever you want, because there is, of course, proprietary reasons along with that. But still, you actually want to use the best possible model for your patients. So you're kind of stuck between this notion. Um, you might say that there are open source solutions. So people have been developing large language models and making their codes available, making the models available. A big example of that one is the model built by Meta. It's called Llama. It is available. You can download and run on your server. But still, these models are really large in their name, so it's hard for you to run on your laptop. It's hard for you to run on a server. You really need to have an infrastructure to do that. So there's this trade-off. The step two is think about healthcare specific model adaptations. So specifically here, we are talking about how the LLMs are these general purpose machines where they can do pretty much everything. And sometimes they can be a jack of all trades and master of none. Essentially, they are pretty good at most tasks. But when you are talking about patient lives, you want them to be perfect. You want them to not generate errors as much as possible, which comes to this notion of, well, maybe ChatGPT is not good enough for neurosurgery. Maybe ChatGPT is not good enough for rocket science, for NASA or something. And in the context that you have a few options. We have actually kind of two options, which is what the authors recommend is, well, let's just train or refine these models for healthcare, right? Let's take this huge model from Llama from Meta, and let's train with our patient data, and let's make it super tailored to our patients. Well, it doesn't really work because it is really, really expensive and to train and to refine these models. Just to give you an example, we have here in the x-axis the number of computational power required, so in petaflops in the log scale, and the y-axis we have the cost in dollars to train these models also in log scale. You can see how the GPT-3 is around here at maybe $10 million, while GPT-4 is close to $100 million. And I would say that GPT-5 is even above that. So even if you are a big institution, if you are a big company, this is a big commitment to make to train your own model or to refine your own model. So that doesn't really apply to all situations, and it's a limitation in that sense. The other alternative is for you to adapt whatever has been already built with your domain knowledge. And this is something that we've been studying a lot, and I think I've already presented a few months ago on doing retrieval augmented generation. So this is called RAG for short, and essentially this is a way for you to use the general model like GPT, like Llama, and connect it to your specific data. Just to give you a solid example, the thing we want to do with our project here at Duke is that we want to be able to support decision making for treating sickle cell disease patients. We actually have a lot of good documentation from the American Blood Association. We have good documentation from Duke that guides the process of decision making for sickle cell disease patients. So we can make these guidelines available for the machine. So the machine is going to take your prompt. Maybe my question is, well, what kind of drug should I give to this patient that has a blood pressure of X, has a heart rate of Y? The model is going to go into your documents. It's going to search for keywords, for terms that are similar to your question, and then it's going to use that information only to generate your answer. So in that scenario, you can really um, expand your knowledge to the knowledge of your model to any field of interest without much adaptation needed on the actual training of the model and that kind of stuff. So this is a very promising. We actually have some results in the literature showing how using RAG, you can boost accuracy significantly. For instance, using oncology guidelines, you go from 57% to 84% accuracy in responses. So this is pretty cool, pretty cool. Noah, I have a question here. Open evidence. I'm not familiar with that one. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah, sure. No, if anyone hasn't used open evidence, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's sort of like a chat GPT, but it specifically references PubMed and so pulls evidence from better sources, and it's really fantastic for answering clinical questions. And I'm curious if it might be doing something similar to what you're talking about with like an LLM that has some, I don't know, guardrails or a RAG system around it. I was just curious if you knew.
No, I'm not familiar, but I'm very curious now that you're saying. The thing that I've seen with these big question and answer models, what they do is that they do a RAG system, but they have to organize the information in a more efficient way. So imagine like you're citing PubMed, like PubMed is also a huge database. So it would take a lot of time for the model to go in and compare all articles to see which ones respond to your question. And usually what they would do is that they would have like a knowledge graph, they would have like a vector search or something that optimizes that. So on top of my head, that's what I think, and I'll definitely check that out. Thank you.
Thanks.
And that using RAG or similar approaches could actually be quite powerful for your adapting to your specific domain. Then the authors will go on about adjusting hyperparameters, that this could be something that can help you get better performance. But I'm not going to go into this. They have a very short paragraph on this. Basically, this is going to be similar to other modeling approaches where you can tune your regularization parameters, your model fit parameters to get better performance. This is going to be similar, so not much to change here. Specifically for large language models, when you're prompting for responses, there is a parameter called temperature. And this temperature is a value that balances the flexibility of the response. So if you have a very low temperature, you can get very different responses every time that you ask the same question. So this allows for more flexibility. But then if you have very high temperature, you're going to get very strict, similar responses every time, which can also be not ideal because then your model is not going to consider the context as much. So this is just something to take a look at and to be aware of. But I wouldn't myself, I would not give this as much focus as the other aspect of the things, because this is going to be similar to other modeling approaches, and you would do this standard. Still, it's a good recommendation.
It seems, João, that step 2 and 3 was like, they missed the boat to make it just one step and talk about model accuracy as an overall.
Yeah.
And then you have different approaches because in the stepwise, it feels like you either have to do step 2 and 3, and it's pretty unlikely that we will do that.
Yeah, and the authors also comment on how there have been studies trying to compare the accuracy on different temperature levels, but this has not been too conclusive thus far. So there's not a lot of evidence on what to do and what not to do here. And then step 4 is a big thing, in my opinion. I'm sure that you have experienced this to some extent when you are doing your day-to-day prompting, especially specifically here. So if you go to ChatGPT and you type a random question or a random phrase without a lot of explanation or without being very descriptive of what you want to do, you might get results that are not really, really accurate to what you want to do. So with coding, which is something that I do every day, like I want to do data analysis, if I go to prompt and say, how can I do this in R, for instance, which is the language that I use most often, the response I'm going to get usually is their ChatGPT is going to pick any function that is on the memory. It's going to give me some result that maybe doesn't apply to my specific case. But then when I go in and I ask the same question, but I say, hey, I have a database that has 5 columns. The columns are called age, sex, and length of stay, whatever. I really wanted to get a summary statistics table using the package called dplyr. Can you give me, an idea of how to do this? Then I get a very accurate and um, a very accurate response to what I was expecting, and that actually fits into my workflow. So this is in a sense, this is called prompt engineering. That's when you go from a very basic prompt to something that has been tested, something that has more structured and can give you better results. In this example, I'm showing you the standard prompt. So you have here a question that is pretty simple, straightforward. So Roger has 5 tennis balls. He buys 2 more cans of tennis balls. Each can has 3 tennis balls. How many tennis balls can you have now? Then you might get an issue, especially when you're doing math, which is a problem for most models. But then when you switch to something that is more on chain of thought, you actually can ask the model to perform a step-by-step reasoning process on things like, well, start by thinking on how many tennis balls are in each can, how many tennis balls he had before. So you kind of break down the response like this and ask the model to reason as a human would do to get the response. This is trying to mimic the thought process or like even the teaching process when you have a problem. And usually this gives you better output. If you have used the ChatGPT 5 or 4 that has that thinking model, which has that option for like longer thinking, longer responses, you can actually click on the response on the processing link and see that the model is breaking down the task in a few steps, and usually that can give you better results. Give that a try if you have the chance. Then step 5 is really focusing on clinical decision support versus non-clinical decision support applications. And here the discussion is really on how is the regulation on each country or each situation guiding the process of approval for these solutions. So let's say that you have this chatbot that is going to help you with patient notes. Maybe this is not actually classified as a clinical decision support. So probably it's less regulated. And then you could implement this uh, without as much trouble, faster, or even without as much compliance needed. But then when you have something that is actually going to guide decision or treatment support, this probably is going to be classified as a clinical decision support device or even classified as a medical device by the FDA, for instance. So this is going to prompt much more regulation, and it's going to take much more time for you to get it done. Of course, this is for safety reasons, for ethical reasons, but then since this field is so new and things are coming out on like the weekly basis, you get new models and new results, etc. It is very hard for you to think about a regulatory process that works for each model. Like it takes years for you to get a drug approved by the FDA, or it takes years for you to get a medical device approved and come to market. Imagine with these models that you have updates every month or so, every week or so, and they are so flexible that they can do many different, they can perform well in many different tests. So you would have to have a regulatory approval for every task, every possible task, for every possible version, for every possible model. This is just not going to work. So what people have been doing is recommending like a sandbox regulatory process where it's a different approach from the standard. Joao, do you want to say anything?
I want to ask you if they discuss this somehow. Is 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 there currently regulation in the US requesting these models to be regulated? Do they discuss it? I'm unfamiliar, and I think we
No,
should be more familiar.
no.
Maybe
The
more of the
paper
clinicians in the
itself
room would
doesn't
have more
doesn't
idea.
go on about it.
Okay, because I'm just thinking what I'm seeing, and it's slightly concerning, is that I'm seeing more applications of these things being done in the low income world, and that could be a
Yes.
new generation of pharmaceutical testing all over again because regulations tend to follow less strict standards. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know, and yeah, the this I think is the key part of all of this, which is thinking how we're gonna do this work with regulations on part of it. So okay, so
Yeah.
they don't talk about it as you said.
No.
No. Okay.
And it's a good point that you had raised about the low and medium income countries because I was watching one lecture by one Duke researcher recently, and she was saying how there's if you measure the accuracy of models deployed in the US versus deployed in Japan, in Australia, in Brazil, in Tanzania, they fluctuate in terms of accuracy for responding medical questions or responding unsafe, giving unsafe responses for mental health or health issues, etc., based on the country that this was deployed. Even if they say that the model is the same version, even if the company says that this is the version 4. And this like raises a red flag for me because this might be in the sense that you're saying, well, there's less regulation in these other countries. My company is in the US, so I'm gonna make available the best possible model for my main customers, and this raises a lot of potential
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah, I'm sure there is discussion and information on this. We should have this marked to be something to talk about at a recent future. What are the advances in regulation on
Hmm.
AI using healthcare, just so that we are all aware. But I agree with you, and a lot of what I hear um, people that are working in this space discussing is how they address this with safeguards
Uh-huh.
and jailbreaks and other kinds of ethical use approach, which is good that that's been thought about. But that's mainly saying I'm doing something about it because I don't think it solves
Hmm.
as much as we are gonna be concerned about accuracy evaluation over time of use.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. What is the actual step here? Because the I couldn't get the step from the title, like CDS versus non-CDS application. But what is the step they
This step
propose in the
is, is
paper?
is thinking about regulation, but they actually go on and call this step CDS versus non-CDS, which is a bit weird. They talk about the
Okay.
regulation process of actually thinking on how your solution fits into the clinical pipeline, if it's
Okay.
support, if it's not support.
So the step would be consider regulatory needs.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right.
With this, they also proposed in the next step on evaluate your model with your solution with a structured approach. And here they try to connect the seven steps in the sixth step, which is the evaluation of it. They call this the acute framework because you have accuracy, consistency, unaltered, traceable, and ethical. And on each of these domains, they disclose on how, for accuracy, you should evaluate your responses for if they are substantive or for substantive, linguistic, and local accuracy errors. So in terms of is your response, is your output being missing important information or not? Is it accurate to your local instance, to your local situation? For consistency, is it reproducible? Is it stable? Is it uniform across institutions or not? Um, and if it's not, if for unaltered, if it's semantically unaltered for what you would expect, you're going to check for hallucinations. But again, they give this framework, but we don't have metrics to do that, which is something that I feel like maybe is something that the literature hasn't caught up to, or if they were not ready to propose those yet. But at least it's like in terms of domains where you should pay attention to. I feel like this is a start.
I'm assuming this is being published elsewhere and they're just reusing it here.
Hmm, maybe.
The acute framework.
I don't know. That's not my perception, but it might be. Maybe I missed.
Okay. Or do they go in detail on each of these
No, they
concepts?
don't. Maybe then you're
Yeah.
right. Let's see. I think I have the paper here. No, they even say we propose the acute mnemonic.
Oh, okay.
Structured approach for assessing LLM response based on accuracy, etc. Okay. Well, but then this connects to the seven steps they are proposing, where the sixth step
Yeah.
is evaluation process.
Yeah, that's fine. Carry on. Sorry.
Cool. And then the seventh step, which is the last, is going to be thinking about model governance structure, especially thinking about continuous monitoring and evaluation, having a dedicated multidisciplinary team doing this evaluation for each patient case and monitoring hallucinations, etc. In terms of actions, you would have to have regular audits, feedback loops, and fallback mechanisms. But again, also this is very, very general. Like feedback loops, fallback mechanisms doesn't really tell us much. But essentially, one thing that resonates a lot with what we've been seeing with any model oversight for healthcare, it's you have to have transparent data, model governance, and documentation of the process that is going. This is similar, at least in idea, to what the ABCDS at Duke does, and the Duke AI Health does as well with the algorithm-based clinical support oversight, where they have, at least in terms of spirit, I want to say, these are similar topics that are covered for the standard machine learning approaches or the imaging approaches, the deep learning approaches. This looks quite similar to that as well. And then to wrap up, what the authors do is that they transform these steps and the framework into clinical questions, like a kind of like a checklist structure, where for recommendation number one, and I apologize, the text is a bit small, but for recommendation one, which is on patient protect patient privacy, They have questions on how is patient data securely transmitted and stored? Are third-party agreements in place to prevent data retention or model training? Are the LLMs hosted on secure hospital-controlled infrastructure? And these examples, these questions could guide you into building this policy, this overall structure of implementation for your institution, for your model, for your group, as an example. But I feel like these are sound examples, sound guiding questions. For instance, here on the sixth step, evaluating using a structured approach, they say, are LLM outputs evaluated using the acute framework or some other framework? Is that a process for documenting evaluation results and using them to guide improvements? For the governance piece, are evaluations performed regularly to ensure ongoing alignment with clinical standards? Is there a dedicated team in place to monitor and oversee LLM performance over time? Again, I feel like these are sound guidance, the sound guidance for you to build to implement your solution. But again, these are quite similar to the standard process I would see for other machine learning approaches, which is expected to some extent. But I would also expect, I would also want to see for from a framework like this, something that is more targeted to LLMs, and it's more structured with metrics to evaluate the output. And then finally, they also give you the acute checklist, which is related again to those domains on accuracy, consistency, unaltered traceability, and ethical, which are also a few questions, a few criteria for you to evaluate the outputs. But here, our response is factually correct and complete. Maybe having a better guidance on how you should or how they propose these factually, the responses are evaluated by fact or for factual completion would be better, would be a good step as well. All right, folks, I think that's it. Just before I wrap up, I want to say, sorry, João, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sorry, I cut you off on your closing remarks. You have to get back to your emotional tone there. But so the question I had is on this thing about, are the responses complete and accurate? How does that work with the error of the model in providing accurate responses? So do they say anything about that? Because one thing for me was that I've seen is people test this out in they test this out in a shorter sample, and then they're gonna roll this model out, and it's gonna be used thousands of times, hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of times, and it's gonna err because it's a model. It has an error, right? And so, do they discuss a little bit about what kind of directions are there in the literature now to adjust for it? I know we've seen the multi-agent approach where the model supervises the model. But if they don't mention anything from what you've been reading, have you seen what kind of approach people are doing for the application of this? Because if this is applied to recognize emails, that's fine. Because if it gets wrong, you miss an email, it's going to bounce back. But now it's a diagnostic, or it's an example that I've been seeing is an LLM that provides support for a given disease group, like hypertensive patients, and tells them that they need to, change whatever habit based on healthcare promotion. But then what the architecture is around is that if the model evaluates any health concern, any risk, then it's pushed to a human to review, or it's reviewed by the model and then pushed to a human. But we somehow need to know what's the accuracy of that process as well, because at some point the model might not evaluate somebody who's at risk. So at least with machine learning models, we have a very good rationale of this is the amount of people I'm going to have mistakes on, and I know the burden of it.
Hmm.
On this. I don't know if there's a move towards trying to get those kinds of accuracy metrics in applications as well.
No, I haven't the authors here they don't go on about that, and I haven't seen a lot of that in the literature. A good structured approach, at least for evaluating knowledge from the models, I've seen in a big publication that was made by I think Google authors. That was the MedPalm model, where they had a series of metrics in terms of accuracy, in terms of consistency, etc., where they have had like medical professionals evaluating the responses. But then to your point, this is going to be deployed across, like, think about like a big hospital network. They're going to deploy this into many hospitals, many facilities, many people are going to use this. It is not feasible to think about that there's going to be humans evaluating this, all of them. So this actually is something that is a concern for sure. And I think we need to get ahead and learn, or at least think about this in the grant proposals that we are doing, just to say, well, we're going to do, since the literature is lacking or mimicking what we have for machine learning, we're going to do this with LLMs, because this is not something that I've seen so far. But again, I I have a limited knowledge of the literature that goes so fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's just things for us to think about. Maybe there's an obvious answer that we're just not aware of. Um, but I'm just curious about this, of the sense of the implementation. Um, but
Hmm.
yeah, good point. This is interesting because I'm trying to write a similar model now, and like it's a framework to try to guide people from developing and implementing health interventions based on AI.
Hmm.
And I was going to ask to use one of these calls to push out the rationale around the model that I'm putting together and get some stress testing with you guys here before I bring it to the group that I'm developing it with. Um, and this is a good intro to that, so I appreciate you pushing this paper out.
Sure, sure, cool. Bring it on. Yeah. If you have that structure, I don't think we have
Bring it
anyone
on.
scheduled for tomorrow.
Okay,
Yeah, bring it on. For tomorrow, I mean next week, if you have that ready.
I'll try.
Cool.
Let's book for that. I'll try.
Okay. And then to wrap up, if you want to learn more, I'm gonna do a intro to LLMs in healthcare presentation or class with folks at the KCMU this Thursday. It's gonna be August 21st. Gonna be 8 to 9 a.m. EST or 3 to 4 p.m. EAT. We're gonna share the link in the future, but we're gonna record as well and try to have them on YouTube. Shameless
Glad that you're so
self-promotion.
organized. No, I'm glad you're so organized for it because I was about to text you asking about the time. The context here, folks, is that this is the class I'm teaching next to this week, and João is more organized for it than I am. That's so good. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if this was not the time, now it's gonna be.
It is now.
All right, folks. Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm here for it. Thank you.
Cool, cool. All right, I appreciate João. There's a few minutes for questions. I just want to make a comment to all in the room that this is a great presentation that anybody can do in whatever area you're studying right now. So João got a paper, he read, he found it interesting. He just put it on a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint and brought to us to discuss. And he's answering questions about what the authors are arguing. If and questions that I was asking that he didn't have answers for, he basically just said, I don't know. And we're gonna pencil those to come discuss further. So that's a very good way anybody here can collaborate with this call without having to know all about it. So please take whatever methodology you're studying right now, and everybody here is studying something. Pencil yourselves in to come talk about it. We're all going to learn about it, and it's how we contribute. I just want to thank you, João, for that.
Cool.
Okay, no other